speaking of censorship, let's get to what happened over at The Hill. Put this up on the screen. Briahna Joy Gray, her contract terminated at The Hill. She writes, "It finally happened. The Hill has fired me. There should be no doubt that At Rising at The Hill has a clear pattern of suppressing speech, particularly when it's critical of the state of Israel. This is why they fired Katie Halper. It was only a matter of time before they fired me." She also shared the email she received. Now, she was not officially an employee. She was under contract there, which was her choice to maintain her own flexibility, as my understanding in any way. They say, "Dear Briahna Joy," which they misspelled her name, but anyway, let's put that aside. "This is 30 days written notice that your consulting services agreement is being terminated pursuant to the provisions of Section 5.3 for convenience. Thank you for your contributions, and we wish you the best in your future endeavors. Sincerely yours, Nexstar Media Incorporated." Ooh. You guys all know the backstory. We started Rising. We were at The Hill. We left for a variety of reasons that you can go back and watch, and took our show independent and have been extremely happy with that choice. Worth mentioning as well that it's under different ownership than when we were there, so we only have so much insight into the workings over there at The Hill at this point. That being said, it's important what she refers to there, Saagar, which is that Katie Halper had previously, starting under when we were there at Rising, she'd been a contributor to the show. We had her on every week, and that continued for some time after we left. She delivered a monologue this is way prior to October 7th, that was critical of Israel, called it an apartheid state, and her contract was terminated. Now, at the time, Briahna was faced with a real sort of crisis of conscience. Like, do I stay at this place? I've been told I can say what I want. Do I stay at this place, or do I say, this crosses an ethical line for me? She delivered a monologue at the time and said, "Listen, they've said I can say what I want, and we're about to find out." And it took a while, but we did indeed find out. And Briahna has been, a fierce critic of Israel and, what she and I and many others see as the genocide they're committing against the Palestinians. And there had been a real effort that I'm sure you saw online too, Saagar. Anything that she said that could be, clipped and used to make her look bad, there was a real sort of concerted effort to make her a problem for Nexstar, and ultimately they were successful.
Yeah, it all comes down to a clip. And I'll say this about Briahna. She also embraced the fight. Let's be real. She enjoyed hitting back at them, and they've all been toiling now for quite some time. Her critics in particular focused in on this clip where you had a family member of an Israeli hostage, where Briahna and her got into a disagreement during an interview that happened on Rising. Now, I want to be clear, based upon our review of this, they had clipped out the video to show at the end Briahna getting frustrated and kind of rolling her eyes after being prompted about a disagreement that they had. When you watch the full clip, you could see that it was a pretty combative exchange, and it's a little bit more understandable exactly why Brianna's disposition was the way it was. So let's watch the full thing together, and you can decide for yourself.
If the world won't help us, we will see 9/11 the second time in the U.S. as well. Because we can already see in the United States, in Michigan, rallies that's calling death to America, not condemning terror organizations in Israel or any other place. In fact, is reflecting to your country as well.
I'm just going to push back against the implication that in Michigan, which has the largest Muslim and Arab population in America, that there is any threat of terrorism from our own people. And I would like to clarify also that one of the rationale that was presented for 9/11 was discussed with America's support of Israel's continued occupation of Palestine. So that's neither here nor there. I really do hope that Netanyahu agrees and Israel agrees to the ceasefire deal that could bring all the hostages, including your sister, home. And I'm sure many people watching are praying for her safety.
Thank you. Me too. And I really hope that you specifically will believe women when they say that they got hurt.
All right, thanks for joining. Stick around, more Rising coming up next.
So I watched, the entire interview was like 20 minutes long, and I watched all of it so I could see okay, how was this going? And Briahna also spoke to Glenn Greenwald and talked about how, her moment of frustration at the end there was much more directed towards her producers who booked this interview and, put Briahna in what was really kind of an impossible situation. Because on the one hand, look, this is a sister of a hostage, like on a human level. Obviously, you empathize. And Briahna does throughout the interview and empathize with what she's going through. On the other hand, she made a lot of claims that just weren't accurate. And so Briahna's left with 3 choices. One, she can sit down at the interview and then people are going to make a lot of that. Like, oh, you won't even talk to, the sister of a hostage. How dare you? Number 2, she just sits there and lets a lot of misinformation be spread on this platform with no corrections and no pushback. Or number 3, she tries to engage as she does and is accused of being insensitive to, a hostage family member. And so she really was put in a totally impossible situation here, which, ends up with that very last part where there's like a half eye roll when the hostage sister says, I hope you believe women. That comes with its whole, I'll get into that in a second too. That is a whole can of worms in and of itself. They clip out just that point to make it look like Briahna was being just outrageously insensitive to someone who, is clearly going through a very traumatic experience. There was a whole online campaign. I really think they were trying to spin up like an advertiser boycott, and it's right after this that Briahna is fired. And the bottom line is that the Nexstar Media Group was not comfortable with her views and her critique. I mean, she was hired to be an analyst and to give her opinion. But they didn't like her opinion, and so that was a bridge too far for them. Another update from Bri that we can put up on the screen here. So apparently there's now a coordinated campaign. She says hundreds of Zionists have spammed the bad faith account, apparently thinking it's Patreon, trying to get me deplatformed from the app. Again, a foreign country targeting American journalists with the goal of making it impossible to earn an income if you criticize Israel. And you can see scrolling on the screen, hundreds of emails sent into the bad faith account, all with the same headline: concerns regarding Briahna Joy Gray's platform on Patreon, dear Patreon, blah, blah, blah. So there's clearly some sort of a coordinated effort to now get her taken off of Patreon and, cancel her there as well. And so as she moves, and I have no doubt Briahna is going to be successful. She's already successful in independent media, right? But now there's an effort to go after her ability to earn an income in independent media as well. And we can't say that that ultimately won't be successful. I mean, you were saying that Patreon's a big company. They're going to be watching out for their bottom line too. I would be worried.
The only reason is that Patreon, this is a little bit in the weeds, but stick with me. You don't get the same payment ownership of your business in the same way that a Supercast, which we previously on, or the Locals that we currently on. The business relationship between us and our customers is one that Breaking Points owns, whereas the companies that we would use facilitate those transactions. Patreon, I believe, is different in terms of the credit card processing and all of that. So if they kick you off, you don't necessarily retain a lot of your customer data. So that's number one. That's something I would be afraid of. But 2, here's the real lesson too, in terms of about independent media, and others. There ain't no producer over here forcing me to do anything I don't want to do. There's no producer getting booked on this or guest on this show, that's forcing me to work in an environment where it's like somebody's setting you up, like you said, to fail, and you're just showing up. I mean, that's a very, very odd dynamic. Ultimately, too, why a show like that, again, no offense, I have nothing against the people who are there, but when you don't have total 100% ownership and control, then it's like a battle and it's a war between you and the people who are working for. That is a very, very toxic dynamic, one which we can attest to a little bit, having previously worked over there. So I think structurally it shows a lot of the issues with corporate media and or any media organization where talent is literally just the talent. It also, just business advice to the people who are running it, what do you think is going to happen over there? I mean, it took them years to recover their subscribership and views from whenever you and I left over at the Hill. Briahna has been hosting there now for years as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, how do you think this is going to work in terms of the trust in your audience? Like, you're not cable. You don't have a built-in contract which keeps your profits locked in regardless of whether Tucker's on your show or not. This is a pure algorithmic audience-based business. Like, that's a very different sensation. So anyway, this is one where you don't know the market that you're working in my opinion.
Yeah, well, they've cultivated this. I remember they also, they fired Kim Iverson, or I don't remember exactly.
She was fired too.
She was fired too.
I forget. What did she do? What was it allegedly?
She was forced out of a Fauci, and her is over.
See, that's another thing though. She was a host on the show, and she's kept off of a freaking interview.
Well, and it's like, how is that even possible? Is like, because of the way we designed Rising.
Yeah.
The audience was very independent.
Right.
Even though it's under a corporate umbrella, it was positioned as like an independent news show. And there's always been tension over that. And obviously, like I said, it's new management, it's new ownership, so it is different, but I think that fundamental dynamic, I know enough to say, is the same. And so at a certain point, you're like, I don't think this show makes a lot of money for them overall, if it makes money at all.
That's it. Look, business-wise, I don't know how the hell they're running it over.
And if you hate your own orientation and audience, then just cancel the show. Like, what are we doing here, right? That's what's always confusing to me as well. But Briahna's firing here, Katie Halper's firing, Mehdi Hasan. I mean, how many people have we seen at this point, in particular in media? Nathan J. Robinson lost his Guardian column, who have lost their jobs specifically because they are Israel critics. Very consistent. And, again, Glenn talks about this ad nauseum, but I think it's worth pointing out. A lot of people made a lot of money pretending they were free speech warriors, and always, and it's just very obvious now, had a giant Israel carve-out exception. So Briahna here ultimately fired for her point of view. One thing I just wanted to take note of is that probably the most controversial thing that Briahna has talked about is the narrative pushed by the Israeli government and picked up by President Joe Biden and by all mainstream anchors, basically, is the narrative of the rape used systematically as a weapon of war on October 7th. And we now have a new report from the Times of London, which backs up Briahna, those who have said, listen, maybe, but we need to see evidence, and there hasn't been evidence offered yet. Let's put this up on the screen. They really dug in to what evidence there is at this point. And obviously, this is as sensitive and as political an issue as there possibly could be. Their headline here, Israel says Hamas weaponized rape. Does the evidence add up? They talk about the Patton report from the UN, which was not meant to be a full investigation. In fact, she called for there to be a full investigation. Israel has denied that request. They write here, Patton made it clear there was sufficient evidence of acts of sexual violence to merit full and proper investigation, and expressed her shock at the brutality of the violence. The report also confirmed Israeli authorities were unable to provide much of the evidence that political leaders had insisted existed. In all the Hamas video footage Patton's team had watched, and all the photographs they had seen, there were no depictions of rape. We hired a leading Israeli dark web researcher, Patton did, to look for evidence of those images, including footage deleted from public sources. None could be found. With regard to October 7th specifically, there hasn't been, and this is again confirmed in this Times of London report, there hasn't been a single firsthand eyewitness. There has been not one survivor who has come forward. Now, perhaps that's because many people who, could have been raped on that day, they're dead, so they're not there to come forward. But the claim from the Israeli government that was directly made to Patton herself, that there were hundreds or thousands of instances, and yet they weren't able to provide a single piece of forensic or visual video evidence, at this point, you have to say that is quite remarkable. And, clearly the initial claims are not supported by the evidence. That's the point that Briahna's been making, very controversial. It's a point I've been making, very controversial, because no one wants to be in the position of nitpicking the atrocities that happened on that day. But to go back to the eye roll video from Briahna, part of when the sister of the hostage says, I want you to believe women, part of why there's an exasperation there is because there's a lot that is behind that. And in fact, they interviewed a woman who's the head of a rape crisis center in Israel. And she said, I did not think that it was sensible for the Israeli government to go forward with this online hashtag campaign that was hashtag Believe Israeli Women. I did not think that was sensible, she says, because they didn't mean believe Israeli women. They meant believe Israel. Again, this is the head of an Israeli rape crisis center, someone who takes allegations of sexual assault very seriously, who had a major issue with this because it wasn't ultimately about believing Israeli women. It was about believing Israel. And so, that is the context that when Briahna is chided, like, you believe Israeli women, well, there hasn't been an Israeli woman who has come forward to claim that she was a victim of sexual assault on that day. So I thought it was important to mention that as well, that on the, I think the day after her firing, she was really vindicated by a mainstream publication that looked into this and said, so far, at least, the evidence of rape as a systemic tool, weapon of war used by Hamas on October 7th, it just doesn't exist.
Oh, I mean, in terms of how this is all played out, I think it's ridiculous. I actually think this has been an important event, I hope, at least in terms of how people who can be skeptical of Israel can see how this always, I think, should apply to a lot of these public adjudications. And I do think it's really gross watching this like woke acceptance of like believe Israeli women. It's like, first of all, what does that even mean? And then second, like you said, there's reams of evidence now at this point that at the very least the claim of like use of war and all that is obviously exaggerated, if not outright completely false, and is being used as part of a campaign to basically justify to be able to kill whomever you want, because then it turns into some sort of like medieval conflict as opposed to one in the 21st century.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Look, I think Briahna, like I said, Briahna enjoys the fight, and she
doesn't back down.
Yeah, she certainly engages in it with a lot of these people, and they are certainly, rising to the occasion as well. But I mean, in this particular case, when you watch it, in a certain sense, you got to put, just as a host, I can put myself in her shoe. If you have a guest on who's goading me, at a certain point, I'm just gonna be like, all right, dude, get the fuck out of here. No matter who you are. And I'm gonna try my best to be sensitive and all that, but that also is like poor form in terms of how the other person is conducting herself, regardless of how sympathetic she should be. The outset from the conversation and that relationship should be one of mutual respect, etc. And if she's not goading her, then, there's no reason for her to do the same thing. But then to weaponize your identity, which is basically what happened. People said, oh, look at her, she's disrespecting the, hot sister or whatever it is, really hostage. That's bullshit when you watch the full thing. It's not right. So no, she shouldn't have been fired. Speak up. Like Robbie, her co-host, apparently disagreed with the decision.
Yeah.
I haven't seen what he had to say.
Glad you noted that.
But it's true. Yeah, he disagreed with that. He does.
And they get into it on Israel too. So
I can empathize. I get it, Robbie.
Staying consistent with his free speech.
And right. He's sticking to his guns, but it's irreconcilable, folks, to anybody who is out there who is working in corporate. This is gonna happen. It may be Israel, it could be something else. You never know. So if you're taking a check from somebody with a 10-figure bottom line or something like that, this is basically inevitable. Or you work for the man and you better know that about yourself.
Yeah, I don't think that it's wrong for people who are independent-minded to work in a mainstream space. You just have to, you need to know there's going to be an expiration date. If you remain true to yourself, there's going to be an expiration date. So I can see the case for, but I want for as long as possible my views to be heard in a mainstream context. I understand that, right? I think that's a reasonable rationale. I actually agree with some of that rationale, but there will come a limit. And this is one of the lines that you are not allowed to cross. The last thing I'll say again is I think Briahna, she's fantastically intelligent, talented, et cetera, already has a large following. She's going to be fine. And we'll certainly support her here in whatever her next endeavors look like. But for people who aren't as established as her.
Yeah, that's the fear.
And don't have Briahna has the type of constitution where she can take these attacks. Mm-hmm. She's been taking these attacks. She handles them very well. She doesn't back down. If you don't have that type of constitution too, it does have a chilling effect where people, don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about the Times of London report. They don't want to talk about getting to the truth of, things that happened and didn't happen on October 7th or sorting through IDF fact from fiction, et cetera. these are very sensitive, difficult topics, and they'll look at this as yet another example and cautionary tale of, you know what, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah.
So that's the chilling effect.
That is very, very true. And that is one where you should worry about people who are like 21, 22 years old going to go take work in the business and get established. You learn the rules of how to get ahead very quickly. Anybody who works in an office, you guys know what we're talking about. You see somebody get fired for something, you're like, okay, better not do that. So that is a lesson, and that has downstream overall effects. That's what Noam Chomsky really talks about in the way that the media is totally rigged. So there you go. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate it. Like we said, we've got a big Ryan story that's coming up later in the day, so stay tuned for that, and we'll see you all later. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.